At the time, she was the largest ship ever built, and yet her maiden voyage would be her last. When the Titanic struck an iceberg, 1,500 men, women, and children drowned, sending shockwaves around the globe and starting a debate that still rages today. Now, a treasure trove of long-lost photographs has emerged. Undiscovered for over a century, their stunning quality has launched a crucial new chapter in the story of the Titanic.
What you found is absolutely inexplicable.
Tantalizing details inside the images have triggered an expert investigation.
Look at this anomaly in the hull.
Wow, this is completely new.
And uncovered a crisis unfolding below decks as the Titanic set sail that spiraled out of control and drove the ship to disaster.
They gambled.
Yes. After a century of speculation,
It's amazing.
the full story behind the sinking of the Titanic can now be told. When the Titanic was completed in 1912, she wasn't just the biggest ship afloat. She was the largest man-made object on Earth. Over 880 feet long and 100 feet tall, she could carry 3,500 passengers.
Titanic passengers can travel in style.
Marketed by her owners as a state-of-the-art supership and practically unsinkable. On the spacious upper decks, mahogany-lined rooms awaited those traveling first class. Crowding onto the lower decks, third-class passengers dreamed of a new life in America. Titanic was a wonder of her world.
This is the footprint of those mighty vessels. The length of 4 city blocks, you see it here. And when you look around this dock, you still can imagine that the waterline was the height of this dock.
Forged here in Belfast, Northern Ireland, as an invincible symbol of British industry, Titanic became instead the byword for catastrophe.
And it's extraordinary even now, a century later, to think that something this big, this massive, could sink in the middle of the North Atlantic.
Irish journalist Senan Maloney has spent 30 years researching the disaster. He believes the real story goes much deeper than an iceberg strike.
There were aspects of this amazing saga that have never been adequately explained. Why was she going so fast when she had been warned repeatedly about an ice field in her path? Why did she not slow down? Why did she not divert? Wider questions about why she was an unsinkable ship that managed to sink in a few hours.
The Titanic was meant to have been built to survive a disaster like a collision at sea. And initially, after the iceberg strike, it looked like her design would keep her afloat well into the next day. The ship's naval architect, Thomas Andrews, was aboard. And after inspecting the damage,
Ladies and gentlemen,
he was confident the ship's internal structure would keep the water at bay.
she will not sink.
But just 2 hours later, the ship inexplicably plunged beneath the waves. Did the iceberg alone cause the disaster? Or was there another culprit? The answers were surely lost with the ship. Or so everyone thought. Now, an album of photographs that lay undiscovered in an attic for over 100 years has come to light. An album that charts the Titanic's brief life. This remarkable collection of images, shown here for the first time on television, were taken by the Titanic's chief electrical engineer, John Kempster. And using a brand new graphic process, the 2D images of the Titanic can now be brought to full color, three-dimensional life.
Wow.
The detail is exquisite.
The album was found at an auction house by Maloney's longtime collaborator and fellow Titanic expert, Steve Raffield. The new cache of photographs offer a rare glimpse of the ship's origins in Belfast, Northern Ireland, before it was unveiled to the world. Photographer John Kempster's job gave him privileged access to the vessel.
I mean, it's fantastic. I mean, this is the Titanic equivalent of King Tutankhamun's tomb, isn't it? Then your launch pictures, of course, are absolutely one of the jewels of the entire collection.
The photographs capture the moment the Titanic was launched into the water in a stunning sequence of images.
And I love it that he puts an annotation on each photograph, going, gone.
Using the living stills technique, we can see the launch as it appeared to the photographer at the time. But these photographs don't just capture a unique moment in time. They reveal something else.
I kept turning the pages, and I wasn't really quite prepared for what I was about to see, because as I turned to this section, I spotted what I thought was a very strange mark on Titanic's hull, and it's just there.
Wow.
And it struck me as being very odd. I thought possibly it could be a reflection from the water, but on looking at the photograph in more detail, I realised it couldn't be, because the next photograph following on from there shows the same diagonal black mark, but the ship is at a different angle. She's moved.
This is a crucial thing.
In these two photographs, the camera angle and position has changed significantly. But the mysterious mark, over 30 feet long, is still there.
What you found is absolutely inexplicable. We were looking at the exact area where the iceberg struck, and we appeared to have a weakness or damage to the hull in that specific place before she even left Belfast.
If the Titanic had been weakened in the very region where it would be struck by an iceberg, it could rewrite history. But what could explain the mark? The photographs reminded Maloney of a fact generally known only to Titanic historians. When the ship set sail, there was a fire on board.
It instantaneously jumped into my mind that we had a fire in this location before she even left Belfast.
The fire took hold in a coal bunker in Boiler Room 6, and the room was directly behind the place where the dark mark begins.
question is, once he knew he was approaching iceberg.
The fire was mentioned in the official inquiry in 1912. Surviving crew members revealed the blaze when they were questioned on the witness stand.
Was there anything wrong?
Yes. The bunker was afire.
But the presiding Lord Commissioner dismissed the fire as a factor in the sinking.
Now, how is this relevant to this inquiry?
The new photographic evidence sends Maloney to the accounts given by eyewitnesses on board. One description in particular, reported just days after the disaster in a newspaper, catches his eye.
I found an article by John Dilly, a fireman, who wasn't brought before the bench in London. He actually was speaking at the quayside to a journalist, and he said that, unlike an irrelevancy, the Titanic fire was very, very important.
What was your work on the Titanic?
My sole duty was to fight the flames together with 11 other firemen.
John Dilly was one of a team of firemen and stokers working in the Titanic's boiler rooms. Dilly describes a serious fire in one of the ship's huge coal storage bunkers. It was discovered the day the Titanic prepared to leave Belfast for Southampton and begin her maiden voyage. The procedure for coal bunker fires was to dig out the burning coal before the fire spread. But the Titanic was the biggest ship ever built. Her coal bunkers were 3 stories high.
We had made no headway against it. Some of the toughest stokers I've worked were getting worried.
So the fire's not out?
No, sir. It's getting worse as a flame.
Did the passengers know?
No.
You are not to talk to the passengers about this, or anyone!
Aye, sir.
And so, when did you get the fire out?
We never. From the day we sailed, the Titanic was on fire.
On April 10th, 1912, the Titanic set sail from Southampton. The upper decks housed dozens of millionaires, including prominent businessmen Benjamin Guggenheim and New York socialite Lady Astor. The lower decks held over 1,000 passengers. Now Maloney suspects that the fire played a much more important role in the Titanic disaster than anyone has ever realized. Irish journalist Senan Maloney is investigating if a coal bunker fire on board the Titanic was serious enough to have played a part in the ship's sinking. He's traveled to London, England, to meet world-renowned experts and find answers.
How are you doing?
How are you?
Thanks so much for meeting me. Look at this.
Is that the location of a coal bunker?
Yeah, that's going into a coal bunker.
Amazing.
Imperial College London's Dr. Guillermo Rain is one of a tiny handful of scientists specializing in the dynamics of coal fires.
This could definitely be because of a smoldering fire.
According to Dr. Rain, the coal bunker fire probably started by itself and burned for some time before it was detected.
The scary part of smoldering coal is that it doesn't need an ignition event. It's spontaneous, it's what we call self-heating. It doesn't need an arsonist, it doesn't even need an accident. Just the bed of coal, the kernel of the bed will start to very slowly to heat up, but it will continue spreading. So when someone detects a smoldering fire in a big bed of coal, the fire has been going on for days, for sure, weeks probably.
The fire was discovered the day the Titanic set sail from Belfast. but the coal had been loaded into its bunkers 3 weeks earlier.
I have accounts from people who went on board at Belfast and who saw a smouldering coal fire in the coal bunker there. Does that mean it must necessarily have been there for weeks already?
Yeah.
Really?
The difficulty is that by the time you get a smell or signs that there is a fire happening in your bunker, it's already too late. And it's really difficult. Smoldering fuels have a range of peak temperatures, maximum temperatures, that go from 500 Celsius to maybe 1,000 Celsius.
Burning at over 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, this accidental fire could explain the dark mark in the photographs. The bunker coal was stacked directly against the hull and a watertight internal division called a bulkhead. Both were critical to keeping the ship afloat. Exposing them to the extreme temperatures of a coal fire was incredibly risky.
The worst-case scenario is it starts to affect severely the mechanical properties of the structure.
It's a design flaw.
It is a design flaw. Let's put it this way, I would not go into a ship that I know there is a smoldering fire inside.
So why did Titanic's owners send their ship to sea with a major fire below decks? Could the answer lie in the troubled origins of the Titanic and her identical sister ship, the Olympic? On the surface, they were a prestige project for her owners.
She is billed in some quarters as Queen of the Ocean, and a spectacular career is envisaged for her. She is literally a wonder of the world.
But behind the fanfare, White Star was losing business to its rival Cunard. The company had been bought a few years earlier by American finance magnate J.P. Morgan for an inflated fee of $800 million in today's money. And Morgan's maritime group, IMM, was already in serious debt and struggling to stem its losses. White Star's chairman, J. Bruce Ismay, was under pressure to construct a new fleet quickly and pull in profits from the transatlantic passenger trade. With more questions than answers, Maloney has come to meet author Brad Matson, an expert on the Titanic's construction.
I didn't look too deeply into the coal bunker fire because most people were dismissing it. Now that I hear that there may be some new evidence, I am very interested in looking into it. Wow. I've never seen these photographs. No, this is completely new.
Brad sheds light on the owner's decision to set sail with a dangerous fire below decks.
The commercial urgency that was driving the White Star Line was driving them to cut certain corners that they didn't necessarily have to cut in order to get these ships to sea right away.
The firm of Harland & Wolff designed the Titanic here at the drafting room in Belfast. On several occasions, White Star Chairman Ismay responded to budgetary pressures by amending their plans.
There were reductions in the scantlings and the dimensions of the steel, the number of lifeboats, and a number of other aspects in the construction of the ship.
To ensure the length of the
According to Brad Matson, his research at the Harland & Wolff archives revealed that the chief designer, Thomas Andrews, was forced to cut the number of lifeboats in half and reduce the width of the hull's steel plating.
Very tight. Thomas, do not overbuild.
The first warning that White Star had cut a corner too far came in September 1911, when sister ship the Olympic collided with the Royal Navy's HMS Hawke in the English Channel. The photographs show a huge hole punched in the Olympic's hull. The thin, lesser-grade steel was easily ripped apart by the low-speed collision. The damage should have rung alarm bells for the Titanic, says metallurgist Dr. Martin Strangwood.
There was
a lot of cracking in the steel, which is not a good idea. The bow of the Hawk can actually penetrate in through the whole steel. And if, as an engineer of that time, you were looking at pictures like this, it's showing that the steel has a capability to fail in an impact.
Intriguingly, Dr. Strangwood also says this impure, lower-grade steel doesn't cope well with exposure to extreme heat.
The steel should be resistant to the effects of a fire as much as possible. So you want the cleanest steel possible.
The damage to the Olympic put it out of action for 8 weeks and affected the Titanic schedule too. Her propeller shaft and blade were transferred to repair the Olympic and get her back out to sea as quickly as possible. This photograph shows the scale of the parts, connecting her steam engines to giant propellers. The repair work cost White Star the equivalent of $22 million and delayed the delivery of the Titanic by a month. Titanic's lucrative maiden voyage had to be postponed. Now, the fire threatened yet another costly delay.
Imagine what the newspapers would have done with something like that. White Star ship fails to sail on time. How would that look? Who's buying the next set of tickets, right? I think their finances were so fragile, it could have brought White Star down. How many people would have gotten off if you'd have said, well, folks, there's a fire burning down below. I think I might have gotten off that ship.
They're making dangerous decisions that everything is going to be all right. The ship is sailing no matter what.
That's right.
The Titanic pushed ahead on schedule. She made a brief stop at Queenstown in Ireland before steaming west toward America. The passengers were completely unaware that beneath their feet, the fire was now so intense it was endangering the ship's steel structure. The Titanic is now just under 3 days from New York. This is one of the Titanic's first-class lounge rooms. Only the wealthiest passengers enjoyed these luxurious salon suites. But as guests enjoyed the new ship, on the bridge, Captain Edward Smith and White Star Chairman Bruce Ismay were receiving wireless warnings that icebergs were drifting into the ship's path. And the Titanic does not have enough lifeboats for everyone on board. According to Ismay, the ship's watertight internal bulkheads make the ship its own lifeboat and practically unsinkable. He believed she would always stay afloat long enough for help to arrive. The passengers' faith in his promises will be cruelly betrayed. At just before midnight on April 14th, 1912, the Titanic steamed into an iceberg at full speed. Within hours, she had plunged to the bottom of the ocean. 1,500 people, including young children, froze to death in the icy black Atlantic waters. Their dreams of a new life in America cruelly taken from them. Just 600 passengers and crew scrambled onto the woefully few lifeboats and survived the horror, many haunted by the screams of those left behind. In the aftermath of the Titanic's sinking, the British government were pressured into setting up an inquiry. It was held in the Scottish Drill Hall in London.
Oh my God.
Holy.
Wow.
Titanic author Brad Matson has joined Maloney to help re-examine the evidence that was heard here in 1912. This hidden gem from Titanic history is rarely open to the public.
I've seen many, many pictures of it, but the photographs don't even come close to doing it justice.
This is a shrine to what happened and all the evidence that was given.
Wow. It's amazing.
The inquiry was overseen by Commissioner Lord Mersey, and more than 100 people were called to give evidence. Most were top brass from the shipping company. For days, the coal bunker fire was barely mentioned. But then, after being denied 2 times, Thomas Lewis won the right to question his men.
We finally get some firemen into the witness box, and Tommy Lewis starts driving towards the fire.
The first survivor to be questioned was one of the replacement crew who boarded at Southampton, Charles Hendrickson. Hendrickson immediately revealed that fire on this scale at sea was an exceptional event.
They ask Hendrickson,
"And when did you last see a fire in a coal bunker?"
I never saw one before.
It has been suggested that fires in coal bunkers are quite a common occurrence. But you have been 5 years in the White Star Line and have not seen a fire in a coal bunker?
No.
The bunker held more than 100 tons of coal, accessible via 2 small hatches. The only way to deal with the fire was to shovel the burning coal into the engine furnaces. 3 days into the voyage, Hendrickson and his team were still shoveling the burning coal.
The Saturday is the eve of the sinking. So the ship was on fire until 24 hours before it hit the iceberg.
And how long did it take to put the fire itself out?
The fire wasn't out much before all the coal was out.
Once all of the burning coal had been cleared out, Hendrickson discovered evidence of the extreme temperature generated inside the bunker.
What condition was it in?
You could see where the bulkhead had been red hot.
Red hot. This is incredible. This is one of the ship's major protections.
Right.
And it's burning red hot. That seems to me like a very big deal indeed.
The steel wall that had taken the brunt of the fire was one of the Titanic's main bulkheads. The bulkheads divided the ship's interior into separate watertight compartments. In the event of a breach in the hull, they would stop water from flooding the entire ship. Now the firemen at the inquiry revealed that the bulkhead had been severely damaged by the fire.
And he says, it was dented.
It was damaged at any rate.
Yes, warped.
This is a crucial area to defend the ship against the ocean coming in.
That's amazing.
A warped bulkhead should have raised serious concerns, but incredibly, the damage inside the emptied coal bunker was just covered over.
I just brushed it off and got some black oil and rubbed over it.
To give it its ordinary appearance?
Yes.
What in tarnation was going on with the control of the ship, the senior officers?
Despite these revelations, throughout the inquiry, Lord Mersey seemed uninterested in the fire and eager to move on. Mersey was an acquaintance of White Star Chairman Bruce Ismay and had connections with the shipping industry.
Commissioner Lord Mersey doesn't want to know. He was making repeated interruptions and closing it down.
whenever they tried to develop the fire story to see where it went.
Do let us confine ourselves to the real serious issues of this inquiry. That fire in the bunker had nothing to do with it.
This is a phenomenal piece of information, and Mercy doesn't want to hear any of it.
The burning coal in Bunker 10 on the Titanic was now clear. But astonishing new evidence reveals that the red-hot bulkhead had caused the fire to spread.
I've come across an article in the New York Tribune from Saturday, April the 20th, 1912. The story was first told by an officer. He's saying the fire was in the coal bunkers, plural, coal bunkers, not one. And this is giving accurate information. He says it was in stokeholds 9 and 10. Here we have evidence of spread into not one bunker, but two.
Having dealt with Bunker 10, firemen were now clearing Bunker 9 as well, throwing even more of the ship's coal supplies into the engine furnaces. Could this new information explain one of the greatest mysteries of the Titanic disaster? Despite the warnings, the Titanic maintained course and accelerated to top speed into an ice field. It's a long-standing misconception that the Titanic was trying to set a record for a transatlantic crossing. The ship simply wasn't fast enough to clock the quickest time. So why did she hit top speed? A spreading fire, causing hundreds more tons of burning coal to be emptied into her furnaces, could finally explain the mystery.
That huge amount of coal being transferred into the hungry furnaces faster than they would like. This is the impelling, driving force that is feeding into a ship. She's now at 22.5 knots, charging towards her destiny.
Em segundo, desastre pode acontecer. Mas uma escolha pode mudar tudo. Maratona Risco de Morte. Hoje, às 9h15 da noite, no National Geographic.
Com Booking.com você acha o melhor lugar para ficar. Para férias ensolaradas e viagens de fim de semana. E se tiver que cancelar, tudo bem. Quase sempre é grátis. E sempre dá para reservar de novo. Booking.com. Booking.uau.
O ponto de interrogação inventou a humanidade. A gente apareceu no mundo milhões de anos atrás, sabendo quase nada. E teve que vir perguntando o caminho para chegar até aqui. Nós somos movidos por perguntas. A gente pergunta, entende, pergunta de novo. Por que o carro anda? Por que a luz acende? O que é que tem embaixo do mar? Mas perguntas difíceis exigem respostas complexas. Como extrair petróleo em grandes profundidades? Como inspirar as pessoas a movimentar suas vidas? Milhares de cientistas trabalham para encontrar as respostas e formular as próximas perguntas. Conhecimento é a grande energia que movimenta o mundo. Então, vamos celebrar o conhecimento e estimular aqueles que movem o mundo adiante. Vamos inventar? Uma jornada pelo conhecimento. Petrobras.
É maravilhoso tirar um smartphone novo da caixa. Agora imagina tirar da caixa uma rede móvel novinha. Uma cobertura incrível. Novinha. O 4G mais rápido, novinho. Um ilimitado para qualquer operadora, do pré ao pós-pago, novinho. Na Claro, tudo é novinho. Até as ideias. E aí, tá dentro? Claro, você merece o novo.
A cada amanhecer, eles encaram novos desafios. Sobreviver numa ilha isolada em pleno Alasca é aventura para os fortes. Ilhados, 10h30 da noite, na sexta No Limite, do National Geographic.
confira nosso simulador de investimentos. Seja qual for seu estilo, conte com uma opção de investimento com a sua digital. Banco do Brasil Estilo, um banco com a sua digital.
Hoje, o Peru quer convidar você a viver a verdadeira riqueza. A riqueza que fica guardada em seu interior. Bem-vindos ao Peru, o país mais rico do mundo.
I thought you wanted Afghanistan.
This is the war I got.
What do you know about it? War. Ain't nothing out there like you think it is. Ain't no training gonna prepare you. There's no glory out there, no heroes. It's just death.
But why wouldn't the captain slow the ship to a safe speed as she approached the ice? One factor may have been overlooked. Britain was in the middle of a miners' strike, and the Titanic had taken on only just enough fuel to make it to New York. The fires had burned through her stock, and losing momentum would have wasted more of her dwindling supply.
Well, if she was to slow down, then when to pile on the speed again, that would increase your coal consumption. If it's at a premium, we're going to run short.
Days away from her destination, the Titanic didn't have the coal reserves left to do anything more than maintain speed and stick to her course.
That does make sense. It seems to be a logical sequence. And this is a relevant thing which has affected the performance of the ship. And I think you lit another fire under this investigation.
When J. Bruce Ismay and Captain Smith read the ice warnings, the possibility of hitting an iceberg seemed unlikely, while the danger of running out of fuel before reaching New York was very real.
Just consider, she's on a maiden voyage, carrying a gaggle full of millionaires on board who've got arrangements and shares to look at when they get to New York. They weren't to foresee the strike of the iceberg, but they could foresee not arriving in New York because they ran out of coal. That would be damage to prestige and the PR for a White Star.
Against the higher risk of embarrassment, they chose to go with the lower risk of catastrophe, and they gambled.
You could say that, yes.
At 11:40 p.m. on the 14th of April, 1912, 400 miles off the coast of Newfoundland, the Titanic struck an iceberg. The hull, potentially weakened by the coal fire inside, was punctured. But the bulkheads held firm, as they were designed to do, and kept the water at bay. A nearby passenger ship, the Carpathia, had received an SOS and was not far away.
There was no reason why Titanic couldn't have lasted an hour and a half longer. Carpathia would have reached it and no one would have died.
According to an eyewitness, after inspecting the ice damage to the hull, the ship's designer, Thomas Andrews, was equally confident.
Let me assure you, if the after bulkheads hold, she will not sink.
What Andrews maybe didn't know is that a critical bulkhead had been badly damaged by the fire and covered over. And now, buried in the transcripts of the American inquiry, Maloney believes he has found the final event that triggered the ship's sudden sinking.
So the American inquiry was brilliant in that initial surge of enthusiasm in drawing out some key answers.
Fred Barrett, survivor and lead fireman, had fought the coal bunker fire and was in Boiler Room 6 at the very moment the ship hit the iceberg.
Were you on duty the night of the accident? Yes. In 6th section, there was a crash, and the wall came straight through the side of the ship. Then I jumped to the next section, number 5.
As seawater flooded in, he took refuge behind the very bulkhead warped by the fire. Then, around 2 hours after the collision, Barrett says the situation drastically changed. He describes a torrent of water crashing through the fire-damaged bulkhead.
I saw a wave of green foam come tearing in between the boilers. And I jumped for the fire ladder.
Fireman Barrett managed to climb up onto deck and into a lifeboat just in time.
When that wall of steel goes, we have a series of tipping dominoes, and this is the critical failure that suddenly gives the upper hand to the ocean.
An academic study shows that at this precise moment, the ship started to sink rapidly. Within 30 minutes, the chronometer on the bridge was beneath the waves. Fireman Barrett's evidence directly links the ship's accelerated sinking to the failure of the damaged bulkhead. But did the fire cause it to give way?
That's where we have to go, and I need to find out whether the fire could have played a much more crucial part than we ever thought before in the Titanic story.
Working together, fire scientist Dr. Guillermo Rain and metallurgist Dr. Martin Strangwood have computer simulated the impact of a coal bunker fire on the Titanic's structure.
We have conducted experiments in my lab at Imperial. So what the bulkhead does is the hot part bulges.
In the model, the blue area of the steel warps forward and the red area warps backwards.
So you get a buckling of the plate.
You have like a wave across the bulkhead.
This might finally explain the dark mark in the photographs, the shadow of a row of buckling hull plates, and explain the damage to the bulkhead. Neither Dr. Rain nor Dr. Strangwood are aware of the eyewitness evidence.
Look there and there.
But incredibly, their independent simulation correlates exactly with the testimony of Titanic fireman Fred Barrett.
That is absolutely amazing, gentlemen, because I will tell you what was said in 1912 in this exact section we're talking about.
The bottom of the watertight container was dinged aft and the other part was dinged forward.
That's precisely what we are predicting.
The match between the eyewitness account and the simulation reinforces its accuracy and its findings. The coal bunker fire was big enough to hit 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, and that temperature would have had a catastrophic effect on the bulkhead steel, reducing its structural integrity by 75%.
So if you have a gradual buildup of water, the force on the steel is high enough to cause a crack, and then the brittleness of the steel means that crack spreads right across in a very catastrophic manner.
Wow, it went through. This is amazing. I find this new theory that is being put together entirely credible, and I'm impressed.
This new analysis totally rewrites how the Titanic sank. Warped and fatally weakened by fire to a quarter of its strength, the bulkhead couldn't resist the water pressure and gave way, hastening the ship's demise. Its failure is absolutely central to the huge loss of life on the Titanic. The bulkheads were the sole reason the Titanic carried so few lifeboats. If they'd held, the ship would have stayed afloat long enough for everyone to be ferried to a rescue vessel. Instead, 1,500 men, women, and children plunged to their deaths. Chief designer Thomas Andrews and Captain Smith went down heroically with the ship. Ever since, they've both shouldered much of the blame for the disaster. The crucial significance of the fire has remained hidden, even though all the evidence was available to the inquiry in 1912. Maloney believes it's because White Star's chairman, Bruce Ismay, who took a place on a lifeboat, hid the truth.
I don't blame the firemen or the trimmers. They were doing what they were told. There's a culture of cover-up within the White Star Line.
White Star told the American inquiry that no firemen had survived. But the intrepid chairman of the U.S. inquiry, Senator William Alden Smith, discovered fireman Fred Barrett still working in their service.
Very good to meet you, Barrett.
At the British inquiry, Lord Mersey, a patron and keynote speaker at the Shipbuilders Guild, didn't call 57 firemen who survived the voyage.
I raise a toast to the shipping interest.
And he brushed over the evidence of those who did appear. Mersey concluded that the disaster was an unavoidable accident caused by excessive speed and made no mention of the fire. It's taken 105 years and Maloney's investigation to finally reveal the full story.
These anomalies has given us the truth, and that the story of the RMS Titanic really is one of fire and ice.